Welcome to Pipe Band Podcast, the premier Pipe Band podcast.
Close. Close enough. Close enough. Hello and welcome everyone to Pod Band Pipecast. We're here today with our pipe major, Chris Hossack. Thank you for being on our show.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
So we actually realized this has been just the weirdest year for everyone, but we realized finally at the end of the year that this is our Mesa Caledonian Pipe Band's 40th year anniversary. Yay!
Yay!
Happy anniversary. So that's a long time, and we thought it would be fun to we would have done something fun with the band, I'm sure. Except the world kind of ended. So we decided to bring on our pipe major, and he's going to talk a little bit about how the band started, why he ended up in Arizona playing pipes and wanting to start a pipe band, Arizona of all places, and some tips for people who have their own bands or want to have their own bands, or should you want to have your own band, or all kinds of things. So we're going to get right into having him introduce himself through these questions. And it's going to be probably a couple episodes of real interesting stuff. So we're excited. Yeah. We're excited to have you here.
So let's just dive right in with the basics. How did you get into piping?
Well, I grew up in a little village in Ontario in Canada called Embro. Embro is an old Scottish community. All the area around was settled by the Scots. And, in the late 1800s, they were moving there and settling and setting up farms, and ultimately Embro became a village, and they had Embro for years has had one of the oldest Highland games in Canada, but the Scottish heritage goes way back. In, I think it was 1896, a bunch of farmers from the area went to the World Tug of War Championship in Scotland and won. And, so, I mean, the Scottish heritage ran deep in Embro. I had started to learn to play the piano, and I hated it. and part of it, I didn't have a music teacher that was inspiring me. And my brother Duncan, my younger brother at the time, he started Highland dancing, and he was an excellent dancer, but his dancing instructor, who had come from the British Army, from one of the Scottish regiments, he was a piper and played with the Ingersoll Pipe Band, and he started talking to Duncan about coming to learn snare drumming, and asked Dad if I was interested in learning to play pipes. And I was thrilled to death, because it was a way out of trying to learn the piano. And I had a couple of friends, Jim Muir and Angus MacArthur. Angus was actually a piper in the band. And Jim was learning, he was about the same level. He had started learning ahead of me, but his teacher, he'd moved to the Ingersoll Pipe Band, and so we started going to the Ingersoll Pipe Band for lessons. And Dad would drive me about maybe 10 miles or so, which doesn't sound like a big difference, but over icy country roads in the winter and so on. That was a heck of a drive sometimes. But he would take me to lessons, and I learned first from Alex Collins, who was a British Army piper, and then from his son Bob Collins, and that's how I got started playing.
Nice. Do you mind me asking what year that was?
12. So that would have been about 1960.
Wow. So we'll fill in the details as we go. That we know that was about 1960, and then you ended up in Arizona starting a pipe band in 1980. So we'll get from Canada to Arizona in a minute.
Right.
So
we moved to Arizona in 1963, and I was piping in the band, in the Ingersoll Pipe Band at that time. And I had competed. In fact, I'd been winning some prizes. I was doing pretty well. And we had a juvenile band that competed, and I was the pipe major of the juvenile band back in the 1963 time before we moved here.
So what was piping in general in Canada like when you started playing? Were there a lot of other bands? Did you have band contests, or what was that like?
It was Ontario was a real hotbed of piping. Still is, but was back then. Around Embro, probably within a 10-mile radius, there were 4 or 5 other pipe bands, good bands.
Wow.
And like I say, we ended up in Ingersoll, but there were a number of good bands. There were a lot of pipers kind of in the early part of their career, guys like Bill Livingston and Ken Eller and Jim McGilvery and Ed Nye were really coming onto the scene about that time as phenomenal pipers. And there was a lot of teaching. I remember John Wilson from Scotland, who was a composer. He was an Army pipe major again in Scotland. He run bands over there. He had moved to Ontario and was teaching a lot of these guys, and I had a couple of lessons from him.
That's cool. That's a lot.
It was something, and coupled with the environment in Embro, it was really a kind of a natural thing for me to do, and something that was really respected. There were a number of pipers in Embro and so on.
So what was it like coming from that, where there's pipers everywhere, to moving to Arizona and integrating with the U.S. piping scene?
We moved to Arizona in 1963. In that time, there were only 2 bands in the Phoenix area. They weren't much by way of bands like I was used to in Ontario, but they were there, and that's what was here. One of the bands was the Moose Highlanders, run by a guy by the name of Sterling Briggs, and that's where Duncan and I started, and that's where I met Jim Grant. The other pipe band was the Phoenix Scottish Pipe Band. I didn't know too much about them at that time, but we started playing with the Moose Highlanders, and they called that because they practiced in the Moose Hall in Phoenix, which is gone now.
I was gonna say that you probably gravitated towards them because I'm from Canada, where I like moose.
Yeah, right. Moosehead. No, it just, that's how we they were the first ones we contacted, and probably the main thing about that has impacted my piping career was Jim Grant was the bass drummer, and Jim became my best friend. And you know, he's been involved with me in piping all through these years. And he's the one that's kept me going. Jim left to go play with the Phoenix Scottish Pipe Band because the Moose Highlanders were kind of deteriorating and had some older members that were either retiring or passing. And so Jim talked me into going over to the Phoenix Scottish, Duncan and myself. Len Wood was a young piper in that band. The pipe major was a guy by the name of Tim Smith. Through that band, I met a man by the name of John Snedden, out of Reno. He would come down here in winter in the valley, and he would work with the Phoenix Scottish Pipe Band. And he started giving me lessons, and much more advanced lessons even than I had had. And he's the one that primarily has influenced my piping career and taught me the attention to detail in the music and so on like that they stayed with me. I played with the Phoenix Pipe Band for several years, maybe 4, something like that, 5. And about that time, I got married. I was going to ASU, and so I backed away from piping for about 10 years. And, you know, trying to finish school and be a husband and work and go to school and then law school after that. And so there was about 10 years when I didn't play. And about 1978, Jim Grant talked me back into starting to play again and convinced me he'd left that band and was playing with a band called the Argyle Pipe Band. And he got me into that. And I was with them for a couple of years, and some of their pipers again were starting to move or retire or things like that. And I ended up pipe major of that band. But they weren't really going anywhere. This is about 79, 80. Rick Knowles had moved from British Columbia to here, and I was taking him over to that band. And Mike Henningsen had come back from the Navy, and he was a phenomenal drummer, was and is. And he was there, but the people that remained in that band weren't interested in going farther and getting better and competing and doing the things that it would take. And so we ended up with all the uniforms and drums and everything, and Jim Grant and Mike Henningsen and Rick Knowles and I then decided, hey, if we want a pipe band, we're going to have to start one, and we're going to have to start from scratch. And so we started teaching people. And that's how we got going. That kind of led into, the first pipe band. We would practice and teach in Rick's chiropractic office here in Mesa, because we didn't have a place to play at the time. And we just started teaching. Rick had some students. I was teaching my sister Diane. Mike Henningsen was teaching David to drum. And Jim was just standing around watching everything and waiting for us to play.
Sounds like a bass drummer.
So we that's how this band, Mesa Caledonian, started.
So I think it's really interesting that, and I know we're past that point in the story now, but how you moved So you were very involved in piping when you were young, and it kind of mimics the story of, I know a lot of people, even now, you're very involved with piping when you're young and it's something you enjoy. And then you moved away, you started a new place, you instantly found a new band, and then went to school and kind of stopped piping for a while, but then came back to it. And I know
probably, when I look back on my life, I don't have too many things that I really truly regret, but not playing for about 10 years was one of those. And if anybody's thinking to do that, don't. It'll be a mistake.
Yeah, I know a lot of people. I mean, you came back to it, right? And you realized that you wanted it in your life again. And a lot of people end up in that same situation of, oh, maybe I'll just stop playing. And especially now in the pandemic, people are thinking, well, maybe it's too much work. Maybe I should just stop playing. Well, there's a reason you started playing in the first place, right?
That's the thing. And I love the music. And became more and more and more immersed in the music and the culture, and that's what brought me back and kept me going. But Jim Grant, throughout my whole career, has been the one that has pushed me to move to different bands or keep going and keep the band going, even in some of the early days when we were struggling and so on. Jim was a big part of, we got to keep this going, because he loved the music like I did.
Shout out to Jim Grant, if he's listening. I don't know if he listens to our podcast, but you'll notice also, for anyone who's listening, who listens to our show regularly, some of these names that he's mentioned, I know everyone knows Diane, who's my mom. So that she was one of the first students of the band, and Michael Henningsen actually was on a couple episodes that we had just a couple months ago, I think it was, where he's in Virginia now, and he's still doing pipe band stuff, but also doing historical reenactment. So all these people still exist. They're still doing things. They're still involved in pipe bands and in building the community. And I think that's super cool to kind of see where that all started.
And all part of the family.
Yeah. You've all kept in touch since the 70s and 80s. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue to our next question here is, what were some of the challenges that you encountered when you were first starting the band? I know you've mentioned a few of them, but what were those challenges? How did you overcome them?
Well, the first challenge was finding people that wanted to learn to play bagpipes or play drums. And Rick and I did a lot of recruiting, and we went to some schools and, did some things like that. We worked hard to try and find people. That was a challenge, but the biggest and the first challenge that you learn really fast when you start running a pipe band is money. and it, funding. And we had the old Argyle uniforms, black watch kilts and spats, and we wanted to try and change that into a civilian pipe band uniform, like what we wear today. And doing that was a challenge. But we scrounged for money. We started teaching and recruiting students, and just about every member of the band today can trace back through their teachers or whatever, to what Rick and Mike Henningsen and Jim and I did at the start to get people taught to play the instrument and play in a band. That's something I'm really proud of and something really cool. we had some high goals, and that over the years has run off. People, we want to play music. We want to play, we want to compete, and we want to play better music than we did the last time we went out. There are some people that just want to, get to where they can kind of grind out the Scotland the Brave or the Amazing Grace and put on a kilt and a uniform and be a spectacle. That's not being a musician, that's being a spectacle. And we didn't want those kinds of people. We wanted people that were dedicated to the music and learning the music right and playing it right and doing all the things right to make a pipe band, the marching in the department and so on. But those were the challenges, people and money. And there's some areas. I mean, if you go up to Ontario, there's dozens of pipers. Probably, if I went back to Embro, there's probably 2 or 3 dozen pipers within a 5 or 10 mile radius. We didn't have that here. We don't have that here. And we've had to teach and teach and teach and be patient and bring them along.
When you said that when you were growing up, in Embro, there were probably 4 or 5 pipe bands. I'm thinking, I've been to Embro in the past 10 years or so, and I can't imagine how many people lived in that town in 1960 and how the density of people to pipers, how does that even?
About 500 people lived in Embro at the time.
Yeah, wow.
It's a lot, or not a lot.
You had Woodstock, that's probably about 10 miles away, and Ingersoll, that's about 10 miles away, and Stratford might be 14 or 15 miles away. I mean, Chelmsford was 10 or 12 miles away. There were all these kind of little communities, but most of those areas were settled by the Scots, and there were a lot of pipers in that area. You move a little farther afield to like Guelph, or, and then Toronto, they had the big bands. London had the same thing. And so there was a lot of piping going on.
So I know some people may know the story and some people may not, but would you want to talk about why? I'm sure some people are thinking, why did you move? What was the purpose of moving in 1963 from Canada to the US, and let alone Arizona of all places?
My mom had arthritis. The doctor told Dad if he didn't get her out of that climate, that she had really bad arthritis, and if he didn't get her out of that climate, she'd be in a wheelchair in 5 years. And Dad did one of the most courageous things I can imagine, moving his whole family here to Arizona. We had one of Mom's brothers and his family that lived here, but that's all we had. And so, I mean, the courage that took just stuns me still. But we did it. I went from a high school of about 600 kids from all over the county that were bussed in from around the county to a high school that had 3,500 kids. And my brother Duncan went from a grade school that had probably 80 kids in all the grades, 1 through 8, and moved to an elementary school where there were like 4,000 kids. I mean, it was culture shock, believe me.
Yeah, and coming from a place where you were, how old were you, 15 or 16 when you moved, right? So,
Yeah.
and then the first thing that you did, which I really appreciate, I remember Grandma and Grandpa always telling that to me when they said the first thing we did was we found a pipe band for the boys.
And they did. That's right. And that's how we got started.
I just think that's a cool story, and that it's interesting because, and people don't realize, so, you two were from Canada. And then when you moved here, that was when my mom and when Dave were born, and they're both in the band now. So it all kind of connects in this weird way.
Yep. We, and moving here, maintaining and keeping a set of pipes going in Ontario is totally different than trying to maintain and keep a set of pipes going here in Arizona in the desert. And over the years, we have learned and had to learn to keep pipes going, what we had to do. But, I wasn't prepared for that.
Yeah, the climate here is significantly different.
Yeah. There weren't the number of places around where you could buy the bag season you needed, or you could buy a pipe bag, or you could buy drone reeds or channel reeds or something like that. It was really difficult at first to even learn how to acquire some of the things you needed.
That was back before the internet. Like now you can just get it all, but
Yeah. Our internet was a phone on the wall,
That's funny. So to kind of end this episode on a high note, so you moved from Canada to Arizona, played with a couple different bands for a while, and then took a break, came back, and you and then the friends decided to start a band and struggled for a while, but you made it work. I mean, what are some of the things or the people that helped make those early years easier?
Well, the real father of the band, I might have been pipe major, but the real father of the band was my dad. He funded us. He kept us going. When we had the opportunity to buy the ancient Bruce Canard filts from the Port Moody Pipe Band, because the Port Moody Pipe Band and Terry and Jack Lee running that were becoming the Simon Fraser University Pipe Band. And buying their kilts was a big step for us. And Dad found the money, funded it basically himself. And he was our roadie. You probably need to do a podcast with Kevin, your dad, because he's now kind of the main band roadie, and he should talk to you about all the things it takes to move a pipe band around. But anyways, Dad did all of that stuff. And they went to all the games, and they set up tents and bought tents so we could have tents to set up and that kind of stuff. So without Dad, he kept me going. Hey, I got an investment in this. You need to keep this going. So I couldn't have done it without the support of Mom and Dad. But that's probably, there's lots of other people. We started getting instruction early on, and we had some amazing people like J.K. McAllister come out, who was pipe major of Shots, a world champion pipe major. And we had Alex Duffett come out and work with Dave. And, he's the father of modern pipe band drumming. If there's a pipe band drumming god, it's Alex Duffett. And we had, Kit Reynolds and some other people like that come out that helped the band. I know John Quigg was out early in our early years, and Ozzie Reed helped me learn how to manage a pipe band a lot too, and as well as helped instruct the band. But he provided a lot of help in terms of how to manage a band. So I've had a lot of help, a lot a lot of support, but it wouldn't have happened without Dad.
That's nice.
So we talk about a band family, but it really truly is a band family. Some are actual family members, but everybody is part of the family, and that's been a real, kind of guiding force in how we've operated the band, tried to, and but yeah, those are probably a lot of the people in the early days that really helped kind of push us a little farther forward.
Yeah. So next episode, which next week for anyone who's listening to this, I know we just talked about how the band got started and what the challenges were in the early years. And next episode, we're going to kind of go beyond that into the rest of the 40 years. And Chris is going to answer some questions about how, what does he wish he knew at start, and what are some challenges that the band went through? What are some advice? What, all these things that are 40 years of life lessons in pipe band.
Okay.
So we will see you all next week, and we'll talk more.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this show, then support us on Patreon for exclusive content, as well as the video of us recording this. We'll have special exercises we'll be writing, as well as tips and tricks with tenor drumming and other instruments to come. Subscribe to us on YouTube for some tenor tutorials and possibly other tutorials later on. And like us on Facebook at Podband Pipecast.